Guess we'll get started. Just a second here. So hi everybody, welcome to Nashville, I guess. I'm John Hall. I'm a application engineer with TriMech, and if you don't know me, I've been doing presentations and demos and tech support and all sorts of SOLIDWORKS related stuff for about 12 years, in the VAR channel. I also really like music, so I'm really happy to be in Nashville. I'm actually from Connecticut, so this is a nice treat for me. Weather's really nice this week compared to home, so. What I'm actually gonna go through today is a whole bunch of assembly tips and tricks. So this is kind of gonna be a little bit of a fast-paced presentation. I can slow things down if you have questions or want me to repeat stuff, but gonna go through some basics, talk about how to understand assemblies. So that's kind of just like navigating and understanding your assemblies, interrogating your models, some basics of how to really get a feel for how many parts there are, how many mates there are, how things are gonna solve and rebuild and stuff like that. And then we'll talk about navigating assemblies. Maybe some tricks and some things you might not be aware of for how to search or filter or actually dive into folders and understand an assembly a little bit better, okay? We'll also talk about assembly mates. So there's a lot of cool little things that you may not be aware of that you can do with mates for assemblies to just make it a little bit more productive, speed your day up a little bit like that. And then I just kind of have a little bit of a grab bag towards the end of a lot of different assembly tips from there. So to start, I'm going to be using this tape gun example. It's not a super complex assembly, but I think it's good enough to kind of get the point across and get you a feel for how the tools we're going to take a look at are today. But we're going to first take a look at understanding this assembly. So one really important thing when you open up an assembly is to kind of understand what it is, especially if you didn't make that assembly, or if someone sent you something and it's been kicked around, a lot of design iterations. Just being able to understand how complex it is, how many sub-assemblies there are, what the mates are like, how it's rebuilding, stuff like that. If you don't know any of that stuff, you're really not going to be very productive with that assembly, right? Yeah? So let's take a look at some of the tools we can use to interrogate our assemblies. So the first thing I want to point out is the welcome page. Not sure if anybody's seen this or dismissed this, or ever, when they first launch the software, they just close it. But there's actually some really good stuff in here. Yeah, I see some smiles. People are nodding. If you did dismiss it, you can get that back at any time. You just click this home button up here in SOLIDWORKS, and that'll pop open your home screen, right? From that home screen, there's actually a lot of interesting stuff you can do. You can see all of the recent documents you looked at, and you can actually pin stuff here so that you can get back to it at any time, right? You can also start a new assembly right from here, look at recent folders you've browsed into, and then there's other tabs up here at the top. If we take a look, there's a recent tab, and there's some online resources like learning and tech alerts and stuff like that. So I just want to encourage you to use this tool. I think it's fantastic. I think a lot of people just ignore it, so pretty good one to use. Also from the recent tab, I really like this because you can actually search and filter based on whatever you want. So if I'm looking for an assembly that I know I worked on last week, I can just search for it right from here. And I can say tape gun, right? And now I will see that tape gun assembly, and I can open that right up. The nice part about that is I don't have to remember it, okay? Now, next thing I want to talk about is the open time dialog. So how many people have seen this screen pop up as you open an assembly? Yeah, quite a few of you, okay? Useful, good, yeah? I think it's pretty important, especially for a larger assembly, to see how long it's gonna open up, and it'll give you a predicted time based on how long it took last time you opened it up, right? But the important part about that is all that information is actually stored in a property inside of SOLIDWORKS. So on that file, there'll actually be a property for SW open time in that file. And you can actually interrogate that and sort by it, and we'll take a look at some of that stuff later. So that'll actually be a property you can use on a data card in PDM or on a drawing if you really want to, or whatever you needed to do with that information. okay? So I think that's a pretty cool one. A lot of people aren't aware that that's also a property. But what I want to focus on next is one of the probably most important assembly tools that is kind of overlooked. And I think this toolbar is probably the best thing to take a look at your assemblies and understand exactly how they work and what's going on with them. And that's the Evaluate toolbar, okay? So show of hands, who's used the Evaluate toolbar in here? Okay, almost everybody, right? So what have you used in the Evaluate toolbar? You probably hit the Measure tool once or twice. You probably have hit the Mass Properties to get a weight, right? Two really common things. But what about all the other buttons on there, right? There's tons of cool stuff you can use on that Evaluate toolbar, and there's some really fantastic things that you can actually use to interrogate your assemblies, okay? So I'm gonna go through some of them. I'm not gonna go through all the clicks and picks in here, but I think there's some cool stuff. So the first thing I wanna talk about is the performance evaluation tool. This is probably the single most important tool when you're working with assemblies, especially if you didn't create them yourself. So you can actually see how long the files take to open, how many graphics triangles there are. So if you got a model that's spinning really slow or rebuilding really slow, maybe there's some really high graphics triangles on one of those parts, right? There's a lot of other cool stuff we can do in there. So let's take a look at that. So if I hop into SOLIDWORks, you'll see we've got the Evaluate toolbar right up here. And if you don't have the Evaluate toolbar turned on, you've probably turned it off because it's on by default. And we can always right-click and turn that tab on or off, right? Now that I've got the Evaluate toolbar on, we can take a look at all these tools in here. And the one I wanted to take a look at right now is something called Performance Evaluation. So you just click on that, and that'll pop open your performance evaluation. And you'll see there's a ton of different pieces of information in here. So we can see details about our files and how long each one took to open up. We can see if there's any files that need to be updated to the newest version of SOLIDWORks, right? If they're created in like 18 or 19 and I'm trying to open them up in 20, right? You'll also see graphics triangles. And I know that this is probably one of the biggest problems with larger assemblies for performance. So this is one I constantly always look at, especially if it's a model I downloaded online and it came from another source or I'm not really familiar with it. Take a look at that graphics triangle. If that number is really high, like in the millions, right, that part has an image quality that's set up to the maximum, and that can really slow your assemblies down. So this is a nice tool to just be able to see that. And there's all these shortcuts in here. I can actually open that file right from here and then do more interrogation on it. Make sense? Cool? All right. There's also a couple of other just general things that are helpful. You can see things about image quality for parts, which has high image quality settings. You can see rebuild performance and how many mates there are that rebuild when you rebuild the assembly, right? If you have an assembly with 100 top-level parts and 3 mates per part, you've got a pretty long rebuild cycle, right? So it's something that's important to know. You can also see an assembly rebuild report from here. Not sure if anybody's seen these, but you can see open times and things like that. If there's errors on open, that'll report that information. And then statistics. Everybody likes statistics and charts and numbers, right? But that can show you things like how many sub-assemblies there are, how many total parts there are, what's unique from those parts, because maybe if you've got 2,000 parts, how many of those are unique, right? Maybe there's only 5 unique bolts that you're reusing and reusing and reusing and reusing. So understanding that can actually help you guide through troubleshooting some assembly stuff, okay? Oops. So that's pretty helpful. And that's the performance evaluation tool. Also, from that performance evaluation tool, or even from the Evaluate toolbar, we could also use the assembly visualization tool. If you haven't used this before, I think it's a pretty helpful one, especially for folks who are doing design reviews, right? If you've got a large team and you want to kind of review your design, maybe sort it or color parts based on certain criteria, this is a great tool for that. So in SOLIDWORks, you can click the assembly visualization tool, and that'll show you everything about those parts, and it'll also color code them based on whatever criteria that you want. So show of hands, how many people use this? Okay, a few. So this is kind of new, hopefully, for some of you. What you can do is you have this little table here that you can work with, and you can see the file names, the quantities in use, and you can also add your own columns and rows in here based on whatever criteria that you think is critical. So if we're talking about graphics triangles, sure, we can sort and color by that, which is what I have here. So we can see that this handle has a really high number of graphics triangles, right? So the image quality is set pretty high. We may want that for this, but if we didn't, we could change that. But what we can also see is this is going to sort based on open time and rebuild time as options as well. So you can add your own columns and headers in here, right? And if you just click, you can actually set what you're going to have for precision. You can also right-click and add different tables and rows and columns and things like that. So you have all these different choices in here. You can also filter and search inside this tool as well. But it's a really nice tool for kind of just interrogating your model set. Okay? So that's just kind of some tools, some general tools I like to use a lot. I do a lot of tech support and I interrogate people's models a lot. And those are two really important tools I use all the time to just look at the models, see what's wrong, maybe find out where errors are, understand how deep the assemblies go, stuff like that. What I want to talk about next is navigating assemblies. So what I mean by navigating assemblies is I really mean understanding the feature tree, being able to search and find parts really quickly, stuff like that, right? Hiding, showing, things of that nature. So the first thing I always like to talk about, and this may be old news for a lot of you folks in here who've been using the software for a long time, but there's this filter bar right at the top of the tree, okay? How many people use that? Okay, quite a few. I'd say 50-50 in this audience. So if you haven't used this filter bar tool, you can just start typing, and it will filter down both the tree and the graphics window, okay? So in SOLIDWORKS, I can hop back over here, turn off my assembly visualization, and now I can use this filter bar up here to search for whatever I want. So if I'm looking for, let's say, an axle or a roller or something, I'll just start typing what I want. Let's type axle, right? And we've got some axles. Or if I want to type roller, right, it'll filter it down to just the roller part, okay? So this is helpful, especially if you know the part number you're looking for, right? Or the string or the beginning string of part numbers that you're looking for. So you can just start typing in there and you're good to go. You can also do a couple other filter styles in here. You could actually have it hide the components that it's relevant to or not hide them. So you've got some checkboxes in there and some options for yourself. That's a pretty helpful little tool, okay? One other thing, and this is, I think, relatively new, you could have that filter bar actually search the component properties. So if you're typing like a material or something that's like, in the properties of the part file, you could actually find that information and it'll filter it down. Okay? All right. Let's take a look at the next section, which is tab to hide, okay? So this is just a quick little keyboard shortcut. Not sure if people use this or leverage this, but I think it's worth a quick little rehash even if you already knew about it. A lot of people who need to hide a component to get it out of the way, you click the component, you hit the hide button, wherever it is, it's a little eyeball, right? And it'll hide that component. But faster than that, you can just hit tab, and whatever you're hovering over will just hide. Okay? Nice and easy. Right? How do you bring it back? Shift and tab. So hold shift and then tab again and it'll bring it back, okay? So nice and easy. I use this tool all the time to just get stuff out of my way, filter stuff down, whatever I need to do. So that'll save you tons and tons and tons of time in the long run. All right. The other one that's really cool is show hidden. So bringing back components can be a little bit tricky and difficult as well. So what I want to go through here is show hidden. So, oops. Sorry about that. We'll hop over to SOLIDWORKS. And let's say I've hidden a bunch of components. All right, so we've got these all hidden. And then I realize, you know what, I really need to bring those back. you can actually alternate what the screen is showing. So it's a tricky one to explain, so I'm just gonna do it visually. So what I can do is I can right-click and I can say Show Hidden Components. And what that'll do is it will actually toggle the view, and now I'm only seeing what's been hidden in the system, okay? So this can be helpful, especially as assemblies get really large, and as you're hiding and showing large pieces of a giant mechanism, things of that nature, right? You can say Show Hidden, and it'll bring back only what's been hidden. And then if you just left-click on the component, it will bring it back into the standard view, so that way when I exit this Show Hidden button, they're all shown again, okay? It's a bit of a tricky one, but I think it's pretty cool once you get used to that, you know, functionality. Can really save you some time, understand what's been hidden, what hasn't, you know, especially if you're trying to find something, or for, like I said, larger assemblies. Isolate. Okay, this one I use quite often. I think it's very helpful for seeing where a part is in context of a larger assembly. So what I want to do here is, let's say I want to look at this part and just this part, okay? So I can right-click and I can say Isolate. What that will do is it'll just isolate my view down to just that one part, okay? Pretty easy little tool. I think it's helpful. You've probably maybe seen this or tried this once or twice, but did you know that you can do a lot of other stuff with it? Okay, so you can actually show the other parts as wireframe. I heard one O in the audience, that's good. All right, and I can show the other parts as transparent, right? So if you're looking to create a nice, cool little in-context graphic view or something like that to show where a part fits in the context of a larger assembly, that's pretty awesome, right? That also works with multiple components. So if I actually selected a couple of parts, I could isolate those parts within the context of the larger assembly, okay? The other cool part about this is once I get it the way I like it, I can save that as a display state. We'll talk about display states in a second if you're not familiar, but once I save that as a display state, I can come back to this exact view later and reuse it, maybe use it on a print if you need to or something along those lines, okay? So that's the Isolate tool. You know, again, just right-click on the part or the series of parts and select Isolate, and you got that sub-menu where you can do a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, let's talk about display states. So I just mentioned display states. What does that mean? Okay, so display states are incredibly helpful. If you haven't used them before, they're basically just alternate ways to look at an assembly. A classic example is different colors, right? You want to paint an assembly like 3 different color options and easily toggle between them to just pick the right one. Okay, you can see that on the screen. We got some different color options. That's okay, that's kind of exciting, but maybe let's think about larger stuff than this tape gun, bigger assemblies, right? Maybe you want to have a display state that shows you know, one area of an assembly. And then you want to have another display state that shows another area of the assembly. And maybe you have like 15 of these different larger areas of work that you need to be working on. So it's really easy to save those as display states to come back to later, okay? If I hop into SOLIDWORKS here, the display states are on your configurations tab, okay? And you'll see we've got the display states area here, where I can then toggle between, just by double clicking, the display state that I'm looking for. So I've got a red model, I've got an all shown, I've got a, you know, just sheet metal parts, I've got everything hidden, right? So, well, I gotta hide those, but you get the picture. Oh, yeah. So you got all these different display state options and things like that that you can actually work with. Make sense? Yeah? So to add a display state, you can just right-click and say Add Display State, okay? And the way that this works is if you just click on a component and change the color or change the hide show state or change the appearance in any way, it's going to maintain that appearance for that new display state you just created. So as an example, let's just create one. Let's name it yellow model for consistency's sake. And then I'm just going to take these two parts and I'm going to paint them, let's say we'll paint them a yellow color. Okay, so we'll drop yellow on there and on there. And now I've got a display state where we've got a yellow option of this tape gun, right? Okay, so just nice and easy to create those display states, work with them, and kind of create stuff on the fly as you go, okay? So that's pretty helpful. One other thing that people don't know about as well is if you go to open up an assembly, you can actually choose which display state you want to open to. Okay, so if you go to open up that assembly and you pick it, you have the choice of config and display state. Okay, so let's think about this from a sheer mathematical standpoint. Okay, so when you open up an assembly, it's opening up all those components that it's shown. They're all opening to your RAM and to your graphics card. Okay. If you've got a really big assembly, you're opening up a lot of components, right? And you're putting a real heavy strain on your computer. Let's say I only need to work on a little tiny subset model. Okay, maybe I make a display state where everything's hidden. And then I just turn on the components that I want to use when I want to use them, right? You can open up an assembly so much faster if the components are hidden and just start working, right? So if you create a display state where everything's hidden, that's a really good strategy to help you open up a complex assembly. Make sense? Anybody ever do that? Show of hands. One person. Did it work well for you? Yeah? Good. Good to hear. We have a question? I'm sorry? That's a great question. So for those who didn't hear, the question was that's only loading it graphically, or not loading the intensity into the graphics card. That's actually not true. Because when you open up an assembly, all the shown parts will load into both the graphics card and the RAM. With SOLIDWORKS, though, if a part is hidden, when the file is open, it will not actually load the component into RAM until it's shown fully. So it actually relieves your RAM quite a bit. So it is a good strategy. There's been a lot of strides with the technology behind the scenes to make that a lot more achievable. So, you know, it's only going to load what it needs to, like mates. Sorry? Which other checkbox are we talking here? If I uncheck that, yeah. I guess you can turn that on if you want to load the hidden components into RAM. If you uncheck it, it won't load them into RAM. Yeah, so that's a good point. I forgot about that checkbox, but yeah, absolutely. But that will actually relieve a lot of load on the computer's intensity. So, good call. Thank you for that. All right. So that's display states. I will say I leverage display states quite a bit. It's easy to get a little overboard with them and go a little, you know, go a little too crazy with display states sometimes. But you know, as long as you got some ones that are, you know, normal to work with, it's a good tool to have. Let's talk about folders in assemblies. As assemblies get more and more complex, and as you work with more and more sub-assemblies and components and hardware and stuff like that, folders become very important, I think. And sorting and organizing systems of parts into folders is really easy. So it's a nice little tool that I think is helpful for a lot of folks. If you go to your assembly here, you'll see I created a folder right here for fasteners, okay? And this fasteners folder, let's hide these two just to get them out of the way. But I can put these two components right into that fasteners folder just by dragging and dropping, right? Now I can also grab a couple other components and add those to a folder as well. Just right click and say add to new folder, and now I've got a new folder here. Let's call this, I don't know, mechanism components. Obviously, I'm not, organizing super accurately, but I think you get the picture there, right? So now I've got a folder for those as well, okay? And these folders are kind of helpful because you can actually see and sort and organize. You can also suppress and unsuppress, and you'll see that as I do that, the folder will actually change color and shape. It'll put a little triangle on there. I don't know how visible that is to you in the back, but there's a triangle there that shows a blue top and a gray bottom to show me that there are some components in this folder that are resolved and some that are suppressed, okay? And then if I hide or show components in here as well, that will actually have a third color to show that some are hidden, okay? So there's like a blank one in there, so that's a third color. So inside that folder are not only resolved components, but suppressed components and hidden components as well. So, at a quick visual glance from the top level, I can see that there's a lot of stuff going on inside this folder. There's, components that are both suppressed and hidden, right? We have a question in the front.
When you're working in these, does the folder structure, if you put like 3 or 4 different sets of folders in there, does that create a lag within the assembly of the building?
That's a good question. So the question was, for everybody who didn't hear it, does adding folders, and correct me if I'm getting the verbiage wrong, but does adding folders add to the complexity or the rebuild time? Yeah? And no, it doesn't. Has no bearing on that whatsoever. So you can just add folders and go. I usually just use them as an organizational structure for an assembly. Sub-assemblies are another great way to do it, but you can always get overboard with the sub-assemblies, right? So I think folders are sometimes a better way to go for certain things, and sub-assemblies are sometimes, it all depends on your design methodology, I suppose. Yeah. Good question, though. All right. Let's talk about favorites, all right? So at the top of your tree in SOLIDWORks, you can actually set up a favorites folder, okay? I find this to be really helpful for assemblies, especially if you do a lot of modification, or if you're one of the folks who likes to do a lot of layout sketches, right? Let's say you've got a bunch of layout sketches that are very early in your assembly that kind of generalize where you're going to place components and what you're going to do with them. Or maybe you've got a feature or two that's really critical to your assembly, right? Very easy to add a feature or a part to your favorites. You can just right-click and say Add to Favorites, right? And you can add a part to a favorite, like I'm doing here. We could add a sketch to the favorites, right? You can add a feature of a component specifically to favorites. And the nice part about that is if you look at the top of the tree, you will see I now have a whole bunch of favorites in the tree, and I don't have to go diving through the feature tree to find those, right? If I'm just going to modify sketch 3, I just look at the top of the tree, it's always there, right? And that's pretty helpful, I think, because, you may have, those may cycle in and out. You may have something that's a favorite today, and then, a week from now, you may want to take it out and just put the next feature that you're working on in there, right? How often have you been diving into feature trees trying to find that one part that you need to work on that day, right? So, helpful tool. Now, on the similar aspect of favorites, just below favorites is a folder called History, okay? History will actually show me the last features or parts that I modified, right? So those last 3 components that I hid are actually showing up in this history folder. So it's a similar concept to favorites, but I don't have to remember to tag something as a favorite, right? It's just gonna remember what I did last, and then if I realize, yeah, I really need to change that again, or show that, or suppress that part, or whatever, it's gonna be right there in the history so I can access it. Cool? Okay? This history folder's always been at the top of the tree. I don't know how many people have actually clicked on it, right? It's been there for quite some time. You look at it every day. All right. So that's pretty helpful. Selection tools. There are a wide range of selection tools. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I encourage you to dive in there and take a look at some of them, but I will talk about some of them as well. These are really helpful for selecting a group or groups of parts. A really common workflow. Grab a part, and I want to grab all the parts that it's mated to, right? Or maybe I need to grab all of the toolbox parts and hide them all, right? So really easy. Just hit the pull down just to the right of the select tool. There's a huge range of selection tools in here, okay? There's some pretty straightforward ones. Select suppressed, select hidden, right? So if I wanted to select everything that's suppressed in my tree, I can do that. And now I have everything that's suppressed selected in the tree. I can then right-click and unsuppress or set to resolved, and it'll bring everything back that I suppressed, okay? I could grab everything that's hidden. I can say select hidden, just right from here, right? But you could also say select mated to, right? So if I pick this part, it'll show me all the parts that it's mated to and select them, okay? You can also select by a whole bunch of different criteria. I could select everything that's identical. So if I grab, for instance, this screw, it'll grab all the identical screws in the system. I think that one's pretty helpful. All right, maybe I'm the only one. All right, so you can also select by size. So that would be selecting by the size of the component, percentage-wise to the rest of the assembly. There's also different ones in here, but like I said, I encourage you to try to select these and try some of these selection tools out. They're actually very helpful. One thing that's actually also really useful, if you use Toolbox, you can hit a button to select all the toolbox parts in the tree, okay? And then the really special one is the Advanced Select tool. And this one, I like it, I think it's cool, but it does take a little getting used to. What you can do here is you can build your own selection tool. If there's something you're doing all the time, like select everything that's made out of ABS in this tree. Well, I can just write that, okay? So we can say, all right, first things first, we're gonna have, let's say, custom property. We're gonna say material is equal to ABS. And now I've got a selection tool that will grab everything that's made out of ABS in that tree. Okay. And then I can also have an OR statement. And then I can say, or grab everything that's made out of this, or whatever I want. Or do an and statement in here. So grab everything that's made out of ABS and stainless steel, right? Whatever criteria I want, that'll help me filter out a larger assembly, understand and select and hide and show and all that fun stuff that we were just playing around with. But if you can't find it and you can't select it, you can't do all that stuff, right? So you can build this selection tool, and you can even name it, right? I don't really need a second line here. And I can save it. And now that'll be a selection tool that I can actually reuse over and over and over again, right? So I could say run the ABS select tool, and then whoop, it'll grab everything made out of ABS, okay? I don't have anything made out of ABS in this tree, but I thought it would be fun. All right. Cool. I think that one's pretty cool. Go ahead. Can you add the advanced selection to the template? What do you mean by the template? The assembly template? So the advanced selection tool is a global SOLIDWORKS tool. So once you save an advanced select tool, it's going to be global in all of SOLIDWORKS for your machine. Does that make sense? So you can run it on any assembly, doesn't matter which one. But just your machine until you save your settings files, right? You can also save that as a macro or something like that if you really wanted to. I guess there may be a methodology that other users could do this or something along those lines, but if there is, I'm not 100% sure, so just come see me afterwards if you want to dive into it. We have a question back here? I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you speak a little louder? That's a good question. The question was, does that become part of your user profile? Yes, it does become part of your user profile. Yes. So that advanced select tool is now a tool that you have. Okay? All right, how often does this happen to you? You got a transparent part, and you need to select through it, right? Or you got a transparent part and it's only selecting through it, and I can't pick the transparent part, right? So there's different settings if you're gonna select through the transparency or not. It's a setting in SOLIDWORKS. You can toggle it on. You can either default select through or default select the transparent part. But how do you alternate it when it's not set the way you want? You hold the shift key, okay? This should have been a presentation all about the shift key. That would have been fun too, but you know, maybe someday. So if you've got a transparent part, by default, SOLIDWORKS is going to automatically select through that transparent part to whatever your part behind it is, okay? But if I wanted to grab this glass shield here, I mean, everybody's trick is, let's go move the mouse a little bit and then we'll click over here, right? But what if there's a whole bunch of parts under there and I can't do that? That happens to me all the time. And then I realize, oh yeah, I have to hit the shift key. Okay, so shift key, if you hold shift, it'll just grab the part that's on top. Okay? Kind of silly, but you know, it does save a lot of time if you can remember to do it. Okay. It does not work for non-transparent parts. He asked if it worked for non-transparent parts, for those of you on the other side of the room. But the select other tool is probably what you're looking for there. So if you right click on something or even left click, there's a select other tool as a quick pop-up here. It looks like a little mouse icon with a whole bunch of faces behind it. And that will show you everything that's in that mouse area that you could possibly select. And so you can choose whatever face you wanted based on what was under your mouse at that time. Okay? There is no default hotkey for select other, but you can always create one with the keyboard shortcuts. All right. Breadcrumbs. This was actually a really cool introduction in SOLIDWORKS 2016. I don't think a lot of people took advantage of it. I think it's actually really useful, especially for assemblies. Let's take a look at it. So if I pick something, let's just pick, let's say this component. I want to know what subassembly that's in and what mates are on that part. Okay, old school method. I go over to the tree. I expand this out. I go down here, I expand out the mates folder. Oh, where was it? It's way up here. Okay, there's my mates folder. And then I got to scroll up. What is subassembly? Okay, so rather than doing all that, you can look at what's called the breadcrumbs. They show up automatically right here at the top left of the screen. And this will show you the face that you selected, and then what feature made that face. And if there's a sketch, it'll show you what sketch made that feature. It'll show you what solid body that pertains to. It'll show you what part that's tied to. If that part has mates on it, it will show you the mates for that part. And you can actually find the mate right from here and then edit it, right? It'll show me what subassembly it's in. And oh, look, the mates changed because now I'm looking at the subassembly mates, right? And so on and so forth. So this is a really helpful little tool if you use it, right? If you ignore it all day, it's not going to help you. So it's a really nice little one that will pop up automatically. Now the other cool part about that breadcrumbs tool is that you can move it to wherever your mouse happens to be. All you have to do is hit the D key. D for breadcrumbs? No? I don't know. So if you hit D, that breadcrumbs tool will move itself to wherever your mouse is. Okay? And the goal of this isn't to, you know, make your day hard, it's to make it easier. And the other thing that's really helpful with this type of tool is that you can spend a lot less time, you know, in the tree and diving into the feature manager tree, and a lot more time focusing on center of screen, right? Spend a lot of time modeling and not on, you know, the actual placement of the mate in that specific folder, in that specific part, and where it all happened to be at that time when I made it 5 years ago, okay? So, cool little feature. I think it's nice. Breadcrumbs are really helpful. A couple other quick ones. Zoom tools. So if you haven't played around with the zoom tools, you know, you've got the zoom to fit. Everybody probably knows that. It's F on your keyboard, or it's also double-click your middle mouse wheel, or it's this little button right here. That'll just fit everything into center of screen, right? Now just to the right of that, you've got this zoom to area, which is a nice little zoom box, right? It'll zoom into wherever that box is. Now there's one other zoom tool that I love to use, and it's not on any toolbar by default, so I'm just gonna show you how to add it to a toolbar, and then I'm gonna use it. So that zoom tool is called zoom to selection, okay? So zoom to selection, where is it? I don't know. I'm just gonna type zoom to selection, and there it is, and I'll drag that to a toolbar, right? We'll just put it on the evaluate toolbar for now. Okay, so what does that actually do? Well, if I pick a small surface or small face, I can click zoom to selection, and it will just center my zoom box on whatever I clicked in on, okay? Useful, helpful, yeah? I use this tool constantly. I think it's quite helpful. I think it's something I hope can save you some time, especially when you're dealing with small fillets or radiuses and stuff, and you just really need to zoom in there and see what's going on, right? Okay. Yes? The question is, does zoom to selection work from the tree? So if you want to zoom to a selection from the tree, you can actually select the part and then do a zoom to selection. You could also right-click, and I don't know if it's a right-click option, to be honest with you, because I never tried. I usually just put it on a toolbar. What's that? Oh, there it is, yeah. Okay, good. Good call, everybody. Group effort. So yes, it's right there. See, I can never remember where the button is because I just put it on a toolbar and use it. So there's about 100 ways to click a button in SolidWorks, right? No? Okay. So I want to talk about assembly mates. What we're going to talk about in assembly mates is just some quick things to maybe speed up your mates. So the first thing is control drag to copy. A lot of people know this already, so I'll just breeze through it. If you want to copy a part, you can just control drag that part, hold control on your keyboard, drag the part, now I've got a copy. Okay? Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. That also works from the tree before anybody asks. Yes, you can control drag out of the tree. Okay? All right. Now, Alt drag. If you hold Alt and drag the part, it will snap whatever you're dragging to another object using mates. It's called a smart mate. Really straightforward. It can be tricky to grab the right edge, so I'm going to grab this edge here. Let me zoom in a little bit. So we're going to grab this edge, and we'll use the top one today. You hold Alt, and it will snap to whatever you drag to. Got to get it positioned right, so probably should have put this part a little differently. Okay. So hold Alt, it'll snap wherever it wants to be. I can hit Tab to flip, and boom, done, mated. Okay? Now you can combine those two, and you can hold Control, and you can hold Alt, and then you can drag that part, and it will both copy, and it will mate the part. Okay? All right. Flexible sub-assemblies. So if you've got a sub-assembly and you need that sub-assembly to move to its full range of motion, you can make it flexible. Okay? That's a really simple one. If we look at our assembly tree, and we want to make this sub-assembly flexible. So right now, it's not going to be able to rotate, right? But if I look at the sub-assembly itself, it can rotate, right? So if I just hop back over to, oops, this one. Hop back over to the sub-assembly, I can say make flexible, and now it should be able to rotate to its degree of motion, right? So that's flexible sub-assemblies. Word of warning, don't go too deep with flexible sub-assemblies. They tend to get a little bit dicey when you have a lot of range of motion and you're not careful about what you're setting as a range of motion. Yeah, we see some nods, okay. All right, with mate, real easy one. We'll just do one real quick. How many people use the with mate in here? Okay, almost everybody. Maybe I shouldn't show this one because everybody's seen it, but let's just copy, let's say this part. We'll hide this one. You can actually select 4 faces. Let's say these two, this one, and this one. In any order, doesn't matter what, and I can hit width, okay? And that will center that part between those 2 other parts, okay? It's just now going to be centered between those 2 parts at all times. That doesn't have to be 2 flat faces either. That could be 2 angled faces. It could be 2 flat faces and a circular face. It could be any combination of things as long as they are, you know, semi-orthogonal, semi, you know, flat or circular or, you know, an axis or something along those lines. So pretty cool one. Oh, sorry, time. All right. Multi-mate. We've got multi-mate. All right, so this one is one of my favorites. So how many people have used the multi-mate? Okay, very few. Low percentage in here. This one hopefully will blow a lot of minds. All right, let's take a look at another example. I got a similar part, but this is way early in the cycle, so it's not fully mated yet, okay? And I got a lot of circular components here. So I want to mate all those circular components together. Okay, I can sit there and do a bunch of concentric mates, that's fine. But what I could also do, so this main bracket, just so you know, is the fixed component, okay? What I could do is I could use the mate tool, and you've probably seen this mate tool before, I'm assuming, because you're all in this assemblies presentation and like that stuff. But if you look just at the top left of that mate tool, there's a mate with a lightning bolt on it. Okay? You've probably seen it. Only a few people in the room have clicked it. Okay. So when I click multi-mate, what that allows me to do is grab a reference, a single circular reference or a flat reference, whatever it is, and then mate a whole bunch of stuff to it. So I just pick, let's say, this circular part here, and then just like that, all these concentric mates are going to get added automatically, and then I can move on with the rest of my design. Okay? It's pretty cool, right? All right, hopefully that one was useful. You see that it added a whole bunch of concentric mates on the fly just by a couple of really fast clicks. All right. You can undo from that dialog box, yes. So you can actually undo one single set from that, that menu down at the bottom. All right, let's talk about mate references. So one thing that I like to do a lot is add mate references to parts that I'm going to reuse all the time, right? So if I'm going to reuse a part a lot, you may want to add a mate reference to it. So like this part, for instance. We can add what's called a mate reference to this part. And basically what that means is if I drag this part into another component, wherever it sees a circular edge, it'll try to snap automatically a bunch of mates to that other circular edge. Okay? So a mate reference is really easy to add. You just click the Features tab. Right under Reference Geometry, you'll see Mate Reference. Okay? And I'm keeping it really simple. You can get really complex with this mate reference tool and build some really intelligent parts, but let's keep it simple for today. Once I build that in, if I add a new component to this system and it snaps to a circular edge, it's going to automatically add the mate. You see that it's adding a mate underneath my mouse dialog there? So it's going to automatically add that mate just by adding that component. So we're going to control drag this part again and snap it over here, and boom, done. Okay? And that can save you tons of time, especially if you reuse this component over and over and over and over again, right? Just drag it where it needs to be, it'll snap automatically into place, and we're good to go. That's a great question. The question was, what if you have configurations with different lengths? And yes, that is beyond the scope of this presentation, but that is certainly something you can do. You can actually have different sizes that actually auto-select as well. So you could have it automatically select the right size that fits into that hole. But you know, that's kind of, it takes a little while to get there. So you know, check that stuff out. It's really good if you're building up a lot of library type of components, right? You have a question back there? You can lock concentric mates automatically now with a checkbox in, I believe, 2020 as they're added. So, what's that? I haven't tested if you can have it automatically do that in the mate reference yet. We can try it, you know. I don't have time today, but we can try it. But there are also settings where you can have it lock concentric automatically anyway. So it's a good question. You can come see me after if you want. All right, so last section here, other assembly tips. Just some quick stuff that I wanted to cover. The envelope tool, I think this is pretty helpful. A lot of people don't design an assembly in a void, right? You're not designing from scratch, you're not designing from scratch, right? Envelope tools are very helpful for designing around parts that you don't need in the bill of materials, right? So if you want to design a whole bunch of components around like some reference parts or like a sheet metal housing, but you're not using that sheet metal housing, right? You can set it as an envelope and still use that part to create sketch geometry or mate to and stuff like that. It's kind of a tricky buried option, but it's not so bad. If you've got a part, you can right click on it and go to the properties of the part, and you can say envelope. If you set that to an envelope component, that component will no longer be in the bill of materials. And it will also set itself automatically to a transparent color, whatever you want to set. But once I do that, I can still use that part, but it's just ignored at the context of the larger assembly, right? So a lot of times if you're, designing around, let's say we're going to be doing a whole bunch of design work, but this is just a reference component, that's a great use for the envelope. Say envelope, and now that's going to be an envelope part, right? So my appearance is overriding that, but you get the picture. So that's the envelope tool. Hopefully that one's useful. I couldn't hear the question. That's a good question. What is the difference between that and the exclude from bill of materials checkbox? So if you do it as an envelope tool, you have more settings for drawings. So if you set it as an envelope tool, you can choose if the envelope shows on the drawing or not. You can also choose if the envelope shows as dashed lines on the drawing. So there's a lot of different other options you can do if it's an envelope versus if it's just excluded from the BOM. So good question. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. It does take it out of the mass properties, that's correct, yep. So yeah, a lot of times you don't want the center of mass calculating to some like really heavy reference part you're designing around, right? So that's helpful. Envelope tool, or sorry, explode view. Let's talk about explode view. So this one is cool. You can grab a bunch of components and we can add an explode view. And you can actually have a series of components that when I drag them, they'll automatically explode the other references, right? So that's a default setting, but you can play around with all these options for how they auto-space, okay? So I don't know if anybody's played around with this in 2020, but this is kind of some new exciting technology for how you can kind of explode and auto-space a set of subcomponents and stuff like that. And you can choose the order of operations for what's going to explode and what's going to space and stuff like that. So play around with that. I think it's pretty cool. You can also drag and drop each component individually to change the order so that they can move for that particular explode step. Okay, so try that tool out. It can be very, very useful. The question was, how do you see it or explode when you get out of it? Yes, so if you go to the Configuration Manager tab, there's an explode view underneath of the config. Okay, so I've got two in here. I've got this one and I've got this one. okay? And you can collapse or animate those at any time. I'm not familiar with an issue with that, but what version of SOLIDWORKS were you running? Okay. The explode view got rewritten completely in, I believe it was 19 or 20. I can't remember. I think it was 19. So that you can actually roll back a tree inside of the explode view just like you would in SOLIDWORKS with a rollback bar. So my guess is that whatever problems were previous existing with the explode tool have kind of been fixed in 19 and 20 because they rewrote it. It's awesome. Like if you haven't gotten up to 19, there's some really cool stuff with explode views. So check that out. You know, there's some really good resources online to watch that stuff too. You can also add smart explode lines. This was actually also in 19, so you could have explode lines that automatically, you know, show where those parts are going to snap to. So if I explode that out, you can include what's called smart explode lines, where it'll actually automatically create the explode lines from the original position of the part and not from some arbitrary zero-based number that it used to do. Okay, so these explode lines are really helpful and easy to do now. It's right under here called insert smart explode lines. All right. And so, with that said, I've got about 5 minutes left. We kind of covered a lot of material here. We talked about assemblies and how to navigate them and how to understand them. We talked about mates and how those worked, and a lot of other just general assembly tips. I want to pause here and ask, does anybody have any questions? That's okay. Kurt has a question? That's kind of weird.
I know. My question is, can I take over your presentation for 2 minutes?
I guess so.
Does anybody want to see some new functionality coming soon to SolidWorks? Anybody?
I do.
Yeah? You do. You haven't even seen this yet, have you?
I haven't seen it.
I surprised John with this. So if you were in the general session this morning, you know we kind of teased this out on the side stage with Tracy and myself. We're going to pop up in sessions like this and show you some new functionality that the R&D team is working on, coming soon to SolidWorks. So let's go ahead and see maybe the first where we are. So, sorry.
Want to drive?
Yeah. So if you missed earlier today, we actually popped up right next door a couple hours ago and showed some sheet metal stuff. If you missed it, no problem. Go to live.solidworks.com. You can find everything you need to there. So this is the second one we've done. Let's take a look. Anybody make massive assemblies? Well, we all know simplifying our assemblies is a great way to get a performance boost, and it's also a great way to help you, give your assembly to other people or other, customers or suppliers or things like that. In 2019, we introduced what's called Silhouette defeature, and this is a terrific method, side by side, step by step. It just walks you through exactly how to create these silhouette defeatured models. You can select on the components you need to keep, parts, bodies, whatever, and then massively simplify the rest of your assembly, just like that, okay? Super easy. If you haven't checked it out, it was new in 2019. I tell you to go check it out. What's new, what's coming soon, sorry, said that wrong. What's coming soon is the ability to save that as a derived configuration, okay? This is huge. This is a game changer. It gives you so many new workflows because this derived configuration, you can just swap back and forth from the fully featured to the derived configuration that's completely simplified. When you move into the next level assembly, guess what? You can just switch back and forth there as well. So you have your option for how you want to set up your assemblies. You can imagine how this piles up as you get to the top of these massive assemblies that you're creating. You have the flexibility to swap from simplified to fully featured as you see fit for whatever purpose you need. And it's great. They're just a derived configuration. They work exactly as you would expect. They work with section views, with LDR. They work with interference detection. They even work with downstream applications. I actually use this for flow simulation to simplify the geometry when I played with this. It's an incredible game changer for us. Look for it. If you play around in the beta program this summer, check it out there. Lots of great functionality. Again, silhouette D feature, saves it as a derived configuration. You can easily toggle back and forth, and works just like any other configuration. With that, I tell you to stay tuned. Stay tuned for us again, live.solidworks.com. Check us out if you missed our earlier session in sheet metal. All of these will be available there. You can watch them anytime on the SolidWorks Live channel. Thank you very much, and I'll let you
All right.
give
Thanks,
it back to
Kurt.
John.
Thank you very much.